You will not believe what the Golden Age was hiding. Imagine the year 430 BCE as you walk near the white marble of the Athenian Agora, the beating heart of philosophy and freedom. The air is thick with the scent of olive oil and political debate, yet beneath the clamor of civic life another scent lingers. A smell of fresh char and agonizing silence. This is where the Golden Age casts its darkest shadow as you watch a girl barely 12 held still while a perfect circular mark branded by a red-hot iron is pressed deep into her bare skin. She does not scream because the pain is not meant to be temporary. The mark is permanent, the signature of ownership, a brand of bondage that reveals the dark reality of Athenian glory. Why did Athenian democracy brand its own people? This searing ritual was not the punishment of a criminal, it was the formal designation of property. In the city that invented democracy, thousands of bodies bore this secret testimony as philosophers spoke endlessly of virtue and equality, while the physical reality for half the population was brutal commercialized servitude. Athenian law had perfected a system that transformed human dignity into taxable revenue and codified severe suffering into routine commerce, forcing us to ask the uncomfortable question, how did Athens stand at all when it was built on so much hidden misery? The true horror of Athenian society was not hidden in shadows or remote lands. It operated in the full, unblinking daylight. For the free citizens was the cradle of liberty, but for the enslaved it was a perfectly regulated machine of exploitation. While Socrates questioned truth in shaded gardens, the most organized trade in human beings in the ancient world functioned just a few streets away, a trade written into law, taxed by the state, and avoided only in public conversation. This is the tragic and essential story of the unnamed, whose suffering funded the glory that history chose to immortalize, detailing the unseen cost of the world's first democracy. How one law sealed the fate of thousands is a tragic historical irony. To understand this fatal contradiction, we must descend beyond the celebrated texts and examine the foundation of Athenian democracy, specifically the reforms of Solon in the 6th century BCE, which abolished debt slavery for citizens and widened political participation. These were lauded as acts of liberation, bringing justice and order to the polis, but this liberation was structurally exclusive. Solon's laws meticulously defined who counted as a person with rights and who remained a consumable asset, meaning the rights of some were expanded inward, while the enslavement of others remained absolute and tragically necessary. The moment a child became currency is deeply disturbing to analyze. Consider the marketplace and the sheer volume of this trade, the quiet churn of human misery powering civic life. Enslaved girls entered Athens through war, through birth, or most commonly through the desperate collapse of poor families. When hunger and debt erased all choice, a daughter became the final painful resource, and documents show young children, some as young as 7, were prepared for a life of ceaseless use, their bodies treated as commodities before maturity. Poverty did not excuse the sale, it tragically justified it, revealing the hidden sacrifice behind Athenian civilization. Once purchased, the mechanism of dehumanization began as they were processed in specialized workshops known as the ergastia, sorting human beings like livestock. Their bodies were examined, teeth, skin, posture, and potential obedience were meticulously assessed. The beautiful were assigned to elite symposia, the average to harbor brothels, and the sick, or those judged ugly, were pushed to the most degraded districts, but every single one shared the same fate, the searing touch of the iron. This body, the permanent scar announced, does not belong to you, and what came next changed everything about their existence and life value. What did the Greeks call their slaves? The owners seldom referred to them as women. They were called andropoda, a term translating literally to men's feet, reducing a human being to a walking tool of convenience. Under Athenian law, the destruction of an enslaved person carried the same penalty as damaging a plow, a fine paid to the owner for damaged property. There was no concept of violation against them because they lacked the legal capacity to consent or to refuse. Their sole identity was prelability, and their function was simply to receive, illustrating the absolute lack of legal humanity. Discover the shocking truth about the taxes that funded democracy. The Athenian state did not simply tolerate this trade, it formalized and monetized it. Brothels required state licenses, and every single transaction was taxed with officials known as the astynomoi, appointed not for moral oversight but for quality control, ensuring the enslaved remained fit for use. If a woman became ill, she was removed, and if she became pregnant, the fetus was frequently aborted with methods that carried a severe risk of collapse for the mother. Tax records preserved on ancient fragments confirm the terrifying scale of this state-sanctioned enterprise. The financial stability of the celebrated democracy rested entirely on systemic exploitation, a brutal economic revelation. Between 15 and 20% of the Athenian state's revenue flowed directly from the regulation and taxation of this commerce, of revenue that funded the public buildings, the religious festivals, and the very schools where philosophers lectured on ethics. The paradox was complete: wisdom was paid for with the suffering of the condemned, and freedom was secured by invisible agonizing chains, demonstrating the hidden cost of the Golden Age. As if economic exploitation were not enough, Athens sought to elevate this violation into the realm of the sacred, a ritual and sacred violation that shocks modern sensibilities. During the Great Dionysia, the most important festival honoring Dionysus, enslaved women were not merely used, they were incorporated into the ritual. Ancient sources suggest they were offered as living components in ceremonies that blended ecstatic worship with collective violation, turning organized cruelty into divine observance under the guise of religious duty. Imagine the city during the festival of March 425 BCE, glowing with torchlight wine and theatrical masks. Citizens crowded into the theater of Dionysus, watching tragedies by Sophocles and Euripides, exploring justice and human dignity. Yet just beyond the theater walls, darker customs unfolded. For 5 days the city lived a disturbing double life. Art reached its highest expression, while religious observance justified the domination and control of human bodies, revealing the shocking double life of Athens. How was the Parthenon paid for? The true terror was not the individual act of cruelty, but the fact that this institution was the city, quiet economic engine. Every vote cast, every speech delivered in the Agora, every marble sculpture on the Acropolis was funded in part by the systematic reduction of women to commodities. Fragments of tax records reveal that in the port of Piraeus alone, over 200 officially licensed establishments operated, employing thousands of enslaved women, providing the key to the city's treasury. Each establishment paid an annual license fee equivalent to 6 months' wages for a skilled artisan, and every transaction was taxed at 10%, collected directly by state officials who sold tokens to clients, revealing the mechanism of control. This financial engine pulled every layer of Athenian society into its brutal machinery. Slaves built the brothels, artisans forged the restraints, and physicians treated the diseases not to heal, but to return bodies to circulation. No corner of the city was truly innocent, and the evidence is written in the tax ledgers. The brothels were deliberately positioned to integrate into civic life, revealing the shocking proximity of this trade. The largest, most expensive ones clustered near the Agora, allowing citizens to move seamlessly from political debate to consumption. Mid-priced establishments lined the harbor, capturing foreign wealth, and the cheapest operated in artisan districts, servicing laborers. But this stratification was not improvised. It was enforced by state decree, demonstrating the state's active complicity in the whole brutal structure. What was the price of a human life in ancient Athens? The pricing system reflected the dehumanization. A night with a Haitier enslaved woman cost 3 days' wages for a seasoned soldier. The next tier was priced like a full meal, and the bottom tier could be rented for the cost of a cup of watered wine. Those who were sick, elderly, or pregnant were sometimes offered free of charge, framed as a public service subsidized by the state, a final absolute extraction from bodies no longer profitable, showing the cold commerce of human misery. The law protected this system with absolute clarity, shielding owners and clients from all consequence. Any resistance from the enslaved was criminalized. A woman who refused a client could be publicly whipped. One who attempted to escape was branded on the face a permanent warning, and often sold to contexts where public violation became part of the spectacle. A woman who struck a client, even in self-defense, could meet a tragic end immediately, revealing the terrible force of law as a protector of property. Yet the law also prohibited permanent injury without the owner's consent and forbade their killing without compensation. This disturbing protection exposed the system's core logic. It protected sexual slaves exactly as it protected any valuable form of private property. It was not protection based on humanity, but on market value. It was the purest form of commodification recognized and enforced by the government, a paradoxical protection that reinforced their status as mere assets. All of this unfolded while the greatest minds in human history debated justice just meters away from the human markets, exposing the shocking silence of philosophy. Socrates taught that wisdom began with acknowledging ignorance, yet never publicly challenged the system that reduced half the population to instruments of use. Plato imagined a utopian republic while accepting slavery as necessary to free citizens for higher thought, demonstrating a devastating historical irony. Aristotle, the master of classification, defined humans as political animals and argued some people, especially women and foreigners, were slaves by nature, making their sexual use as natural as using tools. The contradiction was not accidental, it was the foundation. The ideal of equal participation functioned only because the majority of labor, physical, emotional, and sexual, was delegated to the voiceless, forming a sinister justification for absolute control. Most women consumed by this system did not survive beyond the age of 25, their bodies broken by ceaseless violence, untreated disease, and severe suffering from crude forced abortions eventually ceased to resist. When they finally faded, the system had already prepared for their disappearance, as there were no cemeteries for sex slaves, no funeral rites, and no names carved in stone, leading to their complete mortality and disappearance from history. What happened to the bodies of the dead? Slaves is a chilling final violation. Disposal was handled as cheaply as possible. Many bodies were cast into the Barathron, a deep pit outside Athens where executed criminals and animal remains were thrown. There thousands of women dissolved into anonymous soil mixed with refuse. Others, in a chilling finality, were sold to medical schools where students practiced dissections, meaning even in death, their bodies continued to serve the intellectual progress of the civilization that had destroyed them. But the most chilling fate was reserved for those who survived past usefulness. As age eroded their market value, they were pushed into the lowest, most degraded tier, illegal establishments hidden in cellars where men paid with scraps of food. Conditions were so brutal that death was often a release. Later accounts speak of the sick, the mutilated, and the blind rented at reduced rates as defective merchandise, revealing the system's capacity for sustained cruelty. And even this was not the end of the system's capacity for cruelty, because the children born inside it were absorbed immediately, creating a perpetual cycle of bondage. Pregnant women delivered their babies in the same rooms where they worked, sometimes between clients, ensuring that daughters inherited bondage without ever knowing freedom. Life began already assigned a price. There was no separation between birth and function, making it a truly self-sustaining horror. Throughout this process, Athenian society maintained a structural hypocrisy that sealed its moral collapse. The laws that fiercely protected the sexual purity of citizen women, imposing death penalties for dishonor, simultaneously legitimized the absolute degradation of everyone else. A citizen could violate 100 enslaved women in a single night and remain a respected civic participant, demonstrating the zenith of social injustice and hypocrisy. The logic behind this system was rooted in a moral and religious division. Citizen women were sacred because their purity guaranteed the legitimacy of citizen bloodlines. Sexual slaves were considered necessary, precisely because their availability protected that purity, diverting male desire toward bodies that could not contaminate the lineage of Athens. The virtue of some was sustained entirely through the absolute degradation of others, revealing the true logic of purity. Centuries later, the blood system collapsed, but the monuments built with this suffering still stand, revealing the architectural cost. The Parthenon, the eternal symbol of Greek wisdom and beauty, was financed in part through taxes levied on this immense pain. The theater of Dionysus, where sublime tragedies were performed, was also the setting for systematic ritualized violation. Millions today walk among these ruins, admiring the marble without asking how much blood purchased it, making these silent stones a witness to human suffering. Please note this exploration is created for educational and historical purposes only, as it examines complex themes of power, corruption, and human conflict without depicting explicit or graphic events. This is the truth. History books prefer not to confront the greatest achievements of a civilization can coexist with its most extreme crimes. Athens was not ultimately undone by barbarians. It was dismantled by a system that required the absolute enslavement of the many to secure the theoretical freedom of the few. If this story made you reflect on the fragility of power, stay with us for the next chapter. Only when buried truths are exposed do silent voices speak again, leading to the final verdict on Athenian morality.